Hello and welcome to the How Not to Screw Up Your Kids podcast, the bucket emptying episodes. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Han, psychologist and parenting expert. So, pour yourself a cuppa, find a comfy seat and enjoy the conversation. This week's episode is a listener question, but actually something that's incredibly topical at the moment. And the question simply is, should we ban smartphones? Now, you have probably, unless you've literally sort of gone somewhere where there is no news and no newspapers, you couldn't have missed that this has become a really big issue and something that's been talked about quite topically. And it's this notion that actually we're really super concerned about tech use with children, whether that's what they're accessing online or whether that's social media. And so is the solution to simply ban smartphones, have our children having a good old-fashioned, as my children would call them, Nokia bricks, no influence specifically to a particular brand. But in essence, should we be removing smartphones and saying that children really shouldn't have them until they're 16? Well, my answer, as you would expect, is no. I really don't think that we can tackle this issue around overuse of device and overuse of tech by banning. Remember that our role as parents is we are equipping our children for adulthood. Yeah, we're working with the end in mind. So if we're then reverse engineering that, it's not helpful to simply say, you cannot have this until you reach 16. And then magically, we're assuming that our children are going to become more mature, more able to self-regulate and make good choices. And the reality is, the only way that we can help children make good choices around device use and managing social media is going to be by teaching them moderation and balance when they're younger. So that's the reason why I don't think we should be banning it. And instead, I think we should be educating ourselves and then educating our children. So we're going to be running a series addressing this specific issue because obviously talking about it for 10 minutes is not going to be enough. But I wanted to at least start that. And let me share some things that I think that we can and ought to be doing in terms of that education piece. What's important to remember in terms of context is that obviously the advice that I'm giving you is in an ideal world. If we started from the beginning, from the moment we handed over that device, whether that is an iPad to a 7 or an 8-year-old, or whether that's a smartphone to our 11-year-old who we've decided to give them that because they're moving to secondary school. In an ideal world, when we part with those is when we should be setting the framework for the rules and regulations within our home about its use. And I often use the language of, with age comes privilege. So as we get older, we get more privileges, whether that's we get more pocket money, whether that's we're allowed to do things more independently, whether that's our bedtime is later, whether that is actually being given a smartphone or a specific device. But with privilege comes responsibility in every aspect of our children's development. And when we have those conversations early on about this is a privilege, I know children view it as a right, but within our households, we get to choose whether our children get a smartphone or not. We get to choose whether our children get an iPad or not. So it is a privilege. And it's a privilege that we get to decide when we kind of bestow that upon our children. So with age comes privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility. And responsibility is in our home. And then you decide. I know it's really difficult. And we will be discussing it in a separate episode about the pressure that we feel as parents to conform because our perception is that everybody else is. And of course, our children, what feeds into our children's narrative, of course, is that everyone else is, I am the only one. That genuinely isn't the case. We know because we have been there and we've had the same conversations with our own parents. So with age comes privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. Responsibility looks like X and Y in our household. So that's the ideal. If obviously the horse is bolted and we've now got our children with extreme device use, they're holed up in their bedrooms, they're not doing homework, all of these other things, then we need to pull it back in terms of having conversations. And if it has gone too far the other way, the first thing we need to start doing is bringing it back in. And the best way to do that is to agree some very specific non-device use time. So depending on how far it's got within your family, it's about, has it got so bad that actually you've now got children and teens sat at meal times with devices? If that's the case, then that's the first thing that you work on. At meal times, there are no devices at the table. Work with that. If that isn't an issue and you don't have tech, but the issue is that your children are now insisting on having their bedrooms, having their devices in their bedrooms overnight, work on that. You need to find one sort of area where tech has become overused and reel that one in rather than trying to do too much. That's where the issue sort of really stems from. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing is, and it's really crucial that we do this, is we need to check in on how much are we using our devices? What are we modeling to our children? And that the reality is with smartphones and tech devices, so many of us are now working from home. So we are often legitimately checking work things, but we are also habitually picking up our mobile devices without thinking. So I would ask you this morning when you woke up, what's the first thing that you did? And for most of you who have got a device next to your bed, you would have, without even thinking about it, picked it up and had a look. So really audit what you're doing. I strongly recommend that no one has tech in their bedrooms, unless you have a particular career or job that is part of an emergency service where you could be called in the night and that you need to respond to that and therefore need to sleep with a mobile device in your bedroom, then none of us should be doing that because we want to be modeling best practice to our children. If we are part of some form of emergency service, then that should be not an issue at all to explain to our children as to why the rule is specifically broken for us. So it's really important that we model good device use and start auditing and checking what you're doing. And the third thing that I would say is that start having regular conversations where you all audit your tech use. All digital devices now have mechanisms that tell you how long you're on your phone for, how much you use it, and how often you're on various different apps. Make that something that you have a conversation about as a family at the weekend, part of your Sunday planning meeting, a bit of a show and tell. Let's all look at our devices. Let's have a conversation about it. Are we surprised by the number of hours that we're on our devices? Are we going to work towards reducing that in some way? What are we thinking that we might work towards reducing it for the following week? How might we do that? Set some intentional goals, reflect back, and be accountable to it the following week. So these are just starting points. I know this is a huge topic. We can't deal with it in a 10-minute podcast episode. And so there will be more to come. But hopefully you'll find that helpful and a good place to start. As ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, I would be eternally grateful if you could follow, rate and review this podcast so that others can find us and we can spread the love. So until next time.